The Reserve Bank head, Michelle Bullock, and the PM, Anthony Albanese, though, remain on a collision course over it. You could throw Jim Chalmers in there, of course, as well, the Treasurer. Albo wants pre-election rate cuts, needs them, but the central bank warned underlying price pressures remain too high still. It wouldn't lower the rates on the basis of inflation data that has been distorted by government's cost of living measures. It's as clear as mud on some days, I must admit, but here to give us some understanding is the unconventional economist, Leith Van Onselen again. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Bill. How are you?
Good, mate. Good. Hearing lots of different stuff in terms of interpreting what the Reserve Bank has said after yesterday. This was expected, the outcome, of course. Is it a signal the government still remains a bit out of touch and on a different plane to where the Reserve Bank is?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting to hear. I mean, listeners might recall that Jim Chalmers attacked the RBA recently, saying that they were smashing the economy and basically imploring them to cut interest rates. But this statement by the Reserve Bank yesterday was pretty hawkish. So basically, you know, obviously the whole decision was widely expected by everybody. But probably what wasn't expected was that Michelle Bullock and the statement basically suggested that they're not going to cut interest rates anytime soon. And effectively, they've said that rates are going to remain on hold likely into next year. And the reason for that is they're worried about underlying inflation. So basically, we're expecting to get the CPI indicator today for the monthly CPI indicator. And economists expect that to show that inflation's fallen within the Reserve Bank's target. But a lot of that, the reason behind the fall in inflation is going to be because of the distortions from the federal government subsidies to rents and energy and that sort of thing. So it's kind of artificial.
Yeah.
And also, we've recently had lower petrol prices, which have helped. But the Reserve Bank said they're going to ignore that and they're going to look at the underlying inflation, which is basically the inflation rate when you take out those sort of volatile items, which have been influenced by government, subsidies, artificial. And because of that, they're not happy that underlying inflation isn't falling. It's been pretty stubborn. It hasn't really fallen much in the last 6 months. And because of that, they flagged that they're going to keep interest rates higher until they see that coming off. And another sort of fly in the ointment here, Bill, is that the unemployment rate's been, sort of stuck at 4.2%. It hasn't risen much. And a lot of that's because the federal government's pumping record expenditure into the economy, record jobs growth through the NDIS, things like that. And so we have a situation whereby the private sector's pretty much in recession, a very deep recession, but the economy's been supported by the government's massive spending on NDIS, state government infrastructure projects, those sorts of things.
A bit of that care economy, I think they were calling it, with aged care as well.
That's right, yeah. So the Reserve Bank, the Reserve Bank's here to try and manage the overall economy and the macro economy. And they're concerned about aggregate demand in the economy, which is basically all the demand. And that aggregate demand, despite the fact that households individually are getting smashed, they're cutting back expenditure and everything. The aggregate demand's stayed fairly strong because of this record government spending, also near record population growth. And because of that, the Reserve Bank's going to keep rates on hold for longer. And this obviously presents a massive headache for the federal government because it's going to an election by at least May next year, which is the deadline. And the rest of the world's cutting interest rates now. So the United States, UK, Canada, New Zealand, for example, are all cutting interest rates, and we're stuck not cutting interest rates. And I think the federal government knows, Albo and Jim Chalmers know, that if they only get rate cuts before the next election, they face, a serious prospect of becoming a one-term government. So they're absolutely sweating bullets at the moment, trying to put pressure on the RBA to cut rates, but the RBA is pushing back, and I think quite rightly, because of the federal government's basically pumping demand through its, massive expenditure and also huge immigration. So we've set ourselves up for a big battle here between the federal government and the RBA. And I think after today's CPI, monthly CPI data, which is going to show probably lower headline inflation, the Treasurer is going to be really stepping up the rhetoric fighting the RBA. So it's very interesting times ahead.
Is there any scope anywhere that you see, given what the Reserve Bank governor was saying yesterday, and talking about possibly not till 2026? Is there any case you could make to actually raise interest rates before they come down again, given it's so stubborn and it's not moving, and the government seems to be working against what she's trying to achieve, or not achieving what she is asking them to do?
Yeah, I think that's unlikely. So the RBA did say explicitly that policy is currently restrictive and working broadly as anticipated. So it does acknowledge that we do have, restrictive monetary policy, which means that interest rates are high, given the amount of debt in the economy. So I don't think there's much chance of them raising rates, but they have said that they're going to be data dependent. So effectively, the RBA is going to sit on its hands, going to watch the data come in, both the labour market data and obviously the inflation data. And if the underlying inflation rate falls or the unemployment rate spikes, they'll cut rates, which is basically the way to read that. And if it goes the other way, so for example, if we did suddenly get a spike in inflation and the unemployment rate fell, well then it would hike rates. But I think that's pretty unlikely. So I think we're going to be stuck in a situation whereby they're going to remain on hold until probably early next year. But we just have to see how the data plays out.
So how much does if the state and federal governments are doing a lot of hiring and lifting employment in the public sector, how much does that keep feeding into that rate that keeps it high, and therefore we go in this cycle where nothing's really changing and shifting when it comes to inflation?
Yeah, well, I mean, the public sector's expenditure share of the economy has never been this high. It's at record levels. So effectively, the economy is broken up into three areas. You've got households, which is the biggest, then you have government and business. And the household sector has been smashed, obviously, because of the high interest rates, etc. But it's been compensated for by record government expenditure. So the government share of the economy is just over 27%, which has never been this high before. And according to forecasts that came out this week by Westpac, it's going to keep growing. And a lot of this is to do with the NDIS expenditure, which has grown at 20% a year, the NDIS. So that's just becoming a massive expenditure area, as well as obviously the big build infrastructure projects. So you've seen up there in Queensland, we've got it down here in Victoria. State governments are just spending like mad on infrastructure, and that's also pumping demand. So it's a situation whereby the Reserve Bank's got the foot on the brake through interest rates, but the governments have got the foot on the accelerator through their huge expenditure, as well as near record immigration. So it's a sort of burnout economy at the moment.
It's sort of like, I was saying this yesterday, I don't know if you're aware, that up here they revealed that of $9 billion of budget overruns in the Labor government as they head into the election, and almost, I think, a bit over $4 billion of that was the election sweeteners of the cheap public transport, free electricity bills for power bills for a few months. They're just spending like drunken sailors up here, and then they're putting all that out there to try and help people with cost of living. And aren't they creating and adding to that problem? Because that's putting more money into the economy, which is keeping inflation high?
Yes and no. So obviously, the transport fares. So you got your 50 cent fares up there. That would actually lower inflation directly, because that'd be one of the small inputs into the CPI basket, and that's the same with energy subsidies. But again, these impact the headline inflation rate. They don't impact the underlying inflation rate, which is the thing that the RBA cares about. So the RBA is trying to basically gauge what the price pressures are in the economy, excluding these subsidies. So that's effectively what they're looking at, because they're trying to get a gauge of what the real inflation rate is, rather than the manipulated inflation rate. But those sorts of things they're doing on the transport fares and energy, that wouldn't be adding to inflation. It's probably actually negating inflation in a direct sense, but the Reserve Bank's going to ignore that, if that makes sense. It's a bit convoluted. Oh, look,
that's why we get you on to explain it. I started around on the weekend, I was saying to some of my sons, I said, where does this stop? Like, we've got everything going up, everything's getting dearer, no matter where you look at it, and then we've got governments that are handing out cost of living relief to cope with that. Like, everything can't just keep going up. I mean, governments can't just be giving handouts, and then we expect inflation to go down and things to get back to some sort of normal level. What is normal? What's the new normal look like?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say. I mean, certainly to your point on subsidies, it's a short-term band-aid, right? So it's not addressing the underlying problems. And I've talked about it previously with you, that we've got this broken energy market on the East Coast, and instead of fixing the energy market directly, through gas reservation and those sorts of things like everywhere else in the world does. The federal government and also the state governments are band-aiding over the problem by using taxpayers' money to try and negate the negative impacts of the policy that they've created. So they've created the situation for us to have expensive gas and electricity prices through broken policy. And then their way around it is, instead of addressing the underlying cause, they're instead handing taxpayer money over as subsidies to try and band-aid over the problem that they've created. And it's just indirect policy making. And this is what we've got in Australia everywhere, whereby it's all just band-aids on top of band-aids rather than addressing the underlying problems. And we're seeing it in the rental market as well. I mean, the federal government is handing out, rental assistance to low-income earners when the rental crisis has been caused overwhelmingly by the fact that they've imported, more than 500,000 people more than what they initially projected in their first budget. So that extra 500,000 people has had to find somewhere to live, and that's obviously driven up the rental market. So instead of addressing the problem directly and cutting immigration hard, they're instead doing band-aids and handing out rental subsidies. It's just band-aid on top of band-aids.
Before I let you go, I read the commentary on a daily basis and the fighting between Labor and the federal coalition when it comes to the net zero targets and renewables versus nuclear, and they're completely at odds. It's just a political bun fight. Where's that going to end up in terms of what it's going to cost? And shouldn't there be some sort of bipartisan support and agreement on what a generational change like that has to look like, rather than the politicking that's going on at the moment and one side's having a go at the other for, I want your costings? And where's the costings on what the renewables, what that final dollar's going to look like to get to the point where you want net zero? Where's that going to end and cost the nation?
Absolutely. It's a complete farce. So we've got these fantastical net zero targets, which, quite frankly, are never going to be met. And they're certainly never going to be met when the official the official projection is to increase the population by 50% over the next 40 years, right? So that's going to add all these extra energy users. And the simple fix to the energy debacle is to reserve gas for domestic use so that you can then use gas as the firming power. So the whole problem, Bill, with renewables is that they're intermittent, right? So solar is fantastic in the middle of the day, produces heaps of energy, but at night time it produces nothing. And wind is intermittent as well. So you always need that backstop of hydrocarbons to produce your energy when the renewables don't work, which is a lot of the time. And the best form of energy for that is gas, because gas can be turned on and off at a whim very, very quickly. You can't do that with coal. You can't do that with nuclear. So the whole solution to Australia's energy debacle is to reserve gas for domestic use, which we don't do on the East Coast. Western Australia does it, and everywhere else in the world does it. And then regulate that price at a very cheap price. So at a price whereby if the cost of extraction is $3 out of the ground, they're allowed to charge $4. So they make a 33% markup. Instead, we've got a situation whereby they extract it out of the ground for $3 and charge us 12 or 12 plus, right, which is farcical. So the solution here, Bill, is to reserve the gas for domestic use. That can be used as a firming power while we build out renewables. And then when renewables don't work properly, which is at night time and things like that, we can run the gas-fired turbines cheap, and that'll keep electricity prices cheap and it'll keep gas prices cheap. That's the simple solution. Unfortunately, both politicians of both sides ignore that, and they instead have a bun fights over renewables versus nuclear or these sorts of things. It's all a big distraction. Yeah,
I think we'll be keeping talking about this for a long, long time to come. Thanks very much for your time again, Leith. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers, Phil. Speak to you next time.
Leith Van Onselen, the unconventional economist from Macro Business.